All right, welcome to Answers for Today. We're just kind of laughing about how time goes by and Mother Time catches up with us, and we all kind of have some aches and pains, but we want to. Hey, Chris, I want to live like Paul, where Paul said, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain." You know,
Right.
whatever life curveball brings us, we want to continue to minister to the Lord the best we can. One of the things I also often from time to time want to stop at different ways that you can be taught the Word of God. And one of the great teachers is sitting right next to me. It's Chris Quintana. And if you have, I always say his name wrong, Quintana, right? Quintana.
Correct.
Yeah, there you go. But you can go to his website. And Chris, tell me the name of the website.
Oldpaththeology.net.
Yep, and he teaches there every week, a couple times a week, that you can go there, be ministered to, and grow. Because a great believer where we're at is Agape Chapel, where I pastor at, and we go verse by verse through the entire Bible. Chris, I know you don't deviate very far off of what those scriptures had to say, and I think in the days and lifetimes that we're living in right now, people are looking for answers. And the real answers are found in not what I think, but what does God says,
Right.
and what does God think, and and we're to find that out through the Bible. And I highly recommend that you would read your scriptures daily, that you pray and ask the Lord to speak to you, minister to you. And the author of the book, I always say the author of the book is the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit lives inside of you, and he's saying, yeah, I've been waiting for you to ask,
Right.
and he'll teach you each and every day.
Amen.
Last week we were talking about the days and hours that we're living in. Jesus talks about, Peter talks about, these would be perilous times, and this is recorded about the time when the war over in Gaza is happening, but this will be released probably in 3-4 weeks, and who knows what the world's going to be looking like in 3-4 weeks, right, Chris?
Yes.
And one of the things that when you see things happen, and we don't want to discount the war that's going on, but sometimes prophetic thinking is this Ezekiel 38.
Mm-hmm.
They want to jump to that this is the last, and we don't never really know for sure at this point, but the players, if I understand right, Ezekiel 38, if you have never studied it, I encourage you to read it over, because it shows this great war that's yet, it's still future, right, Chris?
Correct.
It's going to happen, but it involves the players aren't right in this war. If I look at it,
Right.
when somebody came up to me and says, "Is this Ezekiel 38?" Our first response would be, I would say no, because you got to read the text. It's not the players. Why don't you look at that a little bit, or talk to us a little bit about Ezekiel?
Yeah, for people that kind of follow this stuff, I guess one thing that's really important for us to make sure we understand in Ezekiel as he lays those things out, when you get to chapters 38 and 39, that's when the war takes place. Chapter 36 and 37 tells you that God brings Israel back to the land in order for there to be such a war. So you can go back and study your history of the world and history of the Middle East, and you'll find the coalition of nations that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 have never come against Israel at any time historically that we have record from when Ezekiel had written it. And there are characteristic things about the war that he's not really, there's no way that you can say he is describing modern warfare. Or anything but modern warfare. It wouldn't have been anything like his time, the things that he describes. He's trying to put to words stuff that he couldn't have possibly understood, because I believe he's looking at current things. But be that as it may, it is that coalition of nations that just frankly don't work in any history. So the participants that you'll have are main players: Iraq, Persia, not Iraq rather, but Iran/Persia, and much of what we would consider as Russia, especially of the Eastern Bloc, the Muslim parts of Russia. But really, that's the leader of the coalition, is what we would consider as Russia. You have some of what is more than likely kind of Eastern Europe, which again figures prominently because that has so much ties as far as Russia, and even more so now because of the way that the world has changed just in the last couple of years. You have Turkey that's mentioned, and much of northern Africa with the exception of Egypt. what's really conspicuous by the absence are the nations that are not mentioned. And they're mentioned more, and many see that Psalm 83 is looking at those nations as being involved in a different type of a war at a different time. And mainly we're talking about Iraq and Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon. And all of those have attempted to eradicate from the land Israel since 48.
They're right on an immediate border of Israel.
Exactly. So they've all participated to some extent in 48, 67, and 73, all three of those wars. So it's important when people start to look at the potential wars, even the ones who are involved currently, you get a little bit of it. I guess if you're writing a prophetic passage about people that would try to attack, you would call it Lebanon, but we would know it's Hezbollah. Hezbollah is who's doing what they're doing. When we think of Gaza, because in Psalm 83, the Philistines are mentioned, not the Palestinians. They don't exist. The Philistines did. They're in Gaza. So they're participating in this. Iran is participating in this.
Yeah.
And so, stuff is flying out also from Syria, but they've all had their attempts in the last, 100 years, roughly, a little bit less, of their belligerence towards the nation of Israel. Those are the nations that have come against them repeatedly, and those are the ones more mentioned in Psalm 83. Whether what they have done and what we might see going on right now, or a conflict similar to it, will finally stir up the nations that we see, it would appear, that this is for some reason brings them into the territory, and they come after Israel.
Well, I've heard speculations because Israel has a tremendous oil fields now that the mineral all the minerals that they had. We don't really know, do we? That what's gonna be the hook? They call it the hook
Right.
to draw them all in, and but there's going to be something that's going
Sure.
to make them want to come in. But once you put a timeline on this, because a lot of people want to put here in Ezekiel 38, right? This is the war that brings Christ back. They get that mixed up, or is this right after the rapture? Or could it happen while the believers are still here? Do you have any thoughts, or is something we can kind of hang our coat on?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, that is a question that really
I'm
gets a
going to
lot.
put you on the spot.
Nobody can actually nail down the
That's the
complete
right
sequence.
That's the right answer.
Frankly, because we're not given that information.
No.
I've always been of this opinion, and I don't know if you share it or not.
Yeah.
But that kind of, if you think about the kind of upheaval, again, think about the almost nonstop news coverage that there's been, whether it's the protests or the actual war itself, in this tiny little speck of land in that part of the world media is paying all kinds of attention to it. And you've got protests happening all over the world for something so small. Imagine if something like, on the scale of what Ezekiel's talking about, the way that will draw the world's attention. It will be like we've never seen.
The world's going to stop.
Yes. So to me, I've always thought that would be a very easy way to have the rapture be around that time, because it will be there'll be such a big upheaval in the world that the rapture of what I think will be a statistically insignificant amount of humanity leaving the planet won't be noticed.
So I like that thought. In my personal view too, is that it'll happen at that time, because what happened to Christians? Nobody would be caring about the Christians. They're more concerned about the war,
Right.
and how we're going to survive, how we're going to get goods and all that. And
Right.
and it really does make sense from that, if that is the scenario, Chris. And like I said, we don't know for sure. Where when this war takes place, there has to be somebody that's going to bring order to the world,
Right.
and it'd be an awesome opportunity for a man of peace to step in at this
Right.
point, to say, you know what, we gotta settle things down. We gotta go back to living. And a lot of times people get mixed up when they say the Great Tribulation. They figure the whole 7 years is going to be all this warfare going on, but it really speaks about the first 3.5 years. Actually, going to be pretty cool to live around here. Things are going to be good, and then we're going to have order and all that. It almost appears that that this Ezekiel war would start at the beginning, and then this man of peace would bring at least peace in the land for 3.5 years.
Yeah, because the first on the first part of it, when you look at the seals, the first of the seals that are open that leads to the trumpets leads to the bowls, the book
Yeah.
of Revelation, things that we're mentioning. Chapter 6 is where you get those. And ultimately, if I take the literal view that when it says that God gives gives authority to those what's represented in those seals to take out have authority over a quarter of the earth's population. I think what that means is that after those four seals, whether it's famine or pestilence, plague, or even the beasts of the field. I mean, the animals start to attack people from what we read there. That takes a quarter of the world's population. So pretty awful times. By the fifth seal, we know that there are already people that have been martyred for their faith in Jesus, because those are the ones that are under the altar saying, "When will you avenge our blood?"
Yes, yes.
And says, "Not until the ones that are going to make it through the tribulation, who are put to death like you have been." Not until their number is complete, which is at the end of the tribulation. But there will be something that this man is able to accomplish after the initial onslaught of things that makes people willing to just give everything over to him. Revelation 13 talks about that finally people will just give themselves over to him, because they come to the point, this guy's got power over the nations, he's got power over the politics, over the military. Who can make war against him?
Yeah.
So clearly he's going to be able to do some things that really makes people recognize him as being very, very unusual, until finally he demands to be worshipped, and then it really goes very, very
Well,
bad.
I think like one of the great things that the nation is void of right now is true leadership, where somebody could call the shot and everybody would follow.
Right.
I mean, our president right now, we would, I mean, his leadership is, I think, reflected of the country, where nobody's really paying attention to him. Nobody
Sure.
really cares what he says and all that. They can't take him serious.
Right.
But this man, I think, will have charisma, and he'll have the authority and the power that everybody will say yes, because if you follow him, it works. That's all the regular person wants, is they want to be able to live their lives. They want to live, have a very prosperous life, and he'll create an environment for that first 3.5 years where guys like you and I be able to live fine, and we think, hey, yeah, great. What happened to the church? Oh, they're gone. We're glad to get rid of those. They were the troublemakers anyway, right?
Yeah, or they just freaked out at everything that's happening. They just ran up into the mountains. They'll be out sooner or later.
Yeah,
Just forget about them.
yeah. They're hiding someplace.
There'll be a lot of ways to explain away the removal of the church, and it's part of what I think from 2 Thessalonians, that part of that delusion and lie that God allows man to accept is one of that is to explain away the rapture of the church. It was aliens, or they're just bugging out because they're doomsday preppers, or whatever you want to say. That people are looking at everything else as an alternative, and there's nothing that stands as objective truth anymore. Not in our society, anyway.
Okay, so I asked you about Ezekiel. See if you give me a day and a time and all that. What about the rapture? Is it down in a long ways away? When could we expect it? Is there a day or time for that? Or how do we know when the rapture is going to happen? Or, because pretty much I see our society as Christians, a lot of people are still living their life like the Lord's going to come back, but that's way down the road, right? Sure. Tell us a little bit what you see in scriptures about when the rapture could take place.
Right. For me, in my own way, I reason through the whole thing. The one thing that we definitely know is going to happen, and when the things that will take place during that period of time, is the 7 years of the tribulation. So the things that you see setting up for that, that's in full swing right now. So Israel,
even rebuilding of the new temple,
Part of it.
all of it,
Sure.
you're starting to see, right?
yeah, everything is really being put in place where that can happen. The open hostility and belligerence towards Israel, which is just on full display right now, but the nations that are seemingly running out of patience and wanting to do more than they've done. When I start to see the things that more take shape for what we will think about as far as the tribulation is concerned, the move towards global government and having absolute control over people's lives. We watched it with COVID. That you can shut down entire countries out of fear. Well, we've proved that we're susceptible to that.
Yes.
The powers that be know that, and they're the ones who are being governed, whether they realize it or not, by demonic influence. So when I see all of those kind of things taking place, I don't believe the church is here for any of that. So as I see the march towards that really, nobody could convince me otherwise, that could start happening in earnest tomorrow. And since we're that close to it, I would say that to me, the rapture has always been, since the day I've started believing in it and understood it, it's an imminent event. It could happen at any time. It's when you start to see everything else lining up and you just go, well, gosh, here again, we have Israel is the one that causes the nations to tremble. For no good reason. It's this tiny little place, but everybody's trying to figure out what to do about Israel. It's hilarious to watch in the sense
our great nation, senators and congressmen are passing bills and looking at they're all based upon this little itty bitty plot of land that we mentioned earlier.
Before we move on, Terry, I would love to say this to the people who are listening, because we should be praying for this. I fear for what my country is doing in what I believe is treacherous behavior towards Israel.
Yeah.
The things that are going on with the hostages and everything else, a strong leader would have been able to pick up the phone to Hamas and their billionaire leaders and said, we will take every single dime that you guys own and then decide whether or not we allow you to live. And we'll make sure that nobody in Gaza gets a dime of any foreign aid until you give back every last hostage. And we're not doing it incrementally. What will happen because of this ceasefire, though I am thankful for the lives that are being brought back, but it could have been done instantly. They could, if we had that if we would be able to exercise that kind of leverage with strong leadership. The problem is that the IDF soldiers are going to pay the price for this, because Hamas is able to regroup.
Yes.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah, and many more missiles are going to be launched into Israel.
Yep.
And I think you said it 100% right. There's a lack of strong leadership, and that's what, like we were watching in the news, that we're so close to the time that I believe that the church could leave. We could leave this planet. Jesus said something very interesting. He says, when you see these things begin to happen,
Right.
he said, look up, for your redemption draweth nigh.
Right.
And the things that are happening, just like what Chris has been talking about, this program and last week's program there in Ezekiel, about how quickly the war is being ramped up. The whole world is coming against the nation of Israel. And so Jesus' instructions for us is for us to look up, because our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, is coming back for his flock. And that's what I live my life in a certain way, that I like to try to keep one eye looking up for the return of Christ and the other eye looking around, what could I do to be able to minister the gospel of Jesus Christ and get the word of God out. That's why we sit here and do this program, hopefully to encourage people out there. Chris, anything more? We got a few more minutes. Actually, we got still about 10 minutes left concerning Israel and what's happening over there right now. You mentioned that we not only need to pray for them, look out to help them, but what do you expect in the next few weeks or months that is, we've seen the nations around them really be more hostile than what we've ever seen before?
Well, also, it's getting lost in this. The belligerents of Iran and what's happening now, they're still attacking cargo ships. They're even taking shots at some of our military assets.
Yeah.
Mainly out of Yemen, and Yemen is just a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran. Again, strong leadership would call the Ayatollah tomorrow and tell him, look, guys, we can go back to the way that things were just about 3 years ago, and we'll start to embargo everything. You won't sell your oil, you won't do anything. Call off the dogs in Yemen, or else we'll do it for you. They could do all that stuff and really put it to them that if they don't stop doing what they're doing, stop funding Hamas, stop funding Hezbollah, quit sending armaments to Yemen to attack us, or else your world's about to be reshaped.
I think you should run for president or senator.
I'm not electable, my friend. I got too many things on video. Things you and I talk about would make me not a candidate. Yeah. But as far as that's concerned, we do have that amount of leverage if we weren't so weak and compromised. But it just shows where we are.
It's more than just the oil fields, right?
It sure is.
And because we have oil of ourselves, we have a way to produce it, but it's their agenda, what's they're pushing at us.
Precisely.
And so I think it's very interesting that the nations around them, how hostile they became towards Israel. Well, even so, I'm so surprised how hostile we have become. In our streets, protests over. I'm in Southern California, and there's a little town south of us called Irvine. And Irvine had on one of their streets, main boulevards, on a Sunday afternoon, they just blocked the whole street. I don't think it made the news as much, but just local news, and how they stopped all the traffic with all their horns and everything else. And it was just a group of people. Everybody, all the regular people in Irvine just drove around them, kept on going. They weren't really paying attention, but they're trying. They're trying to bring disruption to our normal life.
And let's be honest, we're talking about right on the campus of UC Irvine. And
Yes.
so if you want to find the biggest hotbed of bad information you could ever find, go no further than the universities, because you're hearing the things that the professors are saying and the kids sound just like them. But when I see somebody hold up a sign saying stop the genocide, people we're so cheapening the language. A genocide means that you're trying to eradicate an entire race of people. Genocide, genos.
That's the part that's mind-boggling to
Yeah.
any normal thinking person. When you sit down at a table across, if there's an Arab or a Jew and myself, and I'm as white could be, I never think of it in those terms. I think here's a fella, and here's me, and we're having conversation, and you just talk about whatever. But for something that's embedded that's saying that the Jews need to be wiped out, that has to be satanic. It has to be from the beginning of time all the way back to Abraham. We talked last week's program about where they just want to wipe out that nation.
Well,
Group of people.
think about this. That's what they're accusing Israel of. And before the war, you had roughly 2 million people that lived in Gaza. Israel has the wherewithal, because they're not able to go anywhere else. Egypt won't open their borders.
No.
Jordan won't open their borders. They're not taking any of these refugees. That means that Israel has the ability, and has for coming up on a month and a half, they could have been bombing every square inch of Gaza, and they could have done exactly a genocide if that's what they wanted to. If they wanted to wipe out every person alive in Gaza, they could have done it by now. But that was never their intention. If they were to get one of two things, if they could absolutely wipe out every last member of Hamas, or got them to lay down their weapons, they would not turn their attention towards the civilians. They don't care about that.
No.
That's not Israel's objective. If it was, they would just be wiping out people indiscriminately. That's what they're being accused of, because people are ignorantly, either, whether they realize it or not, they're being just used as dupes to cheapen the language, to make it say something or make it mean something that it doesn't. A genocide means an eradication of a particular genus of people.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Israel knew that they were there living in Gaza all along, but they allowed them to live there until they overstepped the boundary,
Right.
where they came into land and attacked their children and kidnapped. And we know the history of what led up to the beginning of it. And I love it when Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24, 25. We touched on that a little bit. And he talked about when these things, he says, and he sat down on the Mount of Olives, Chris, then the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when these things be. Chris, could you tell me when these things should be, and what should be the signs of his coming and the end of the world? Wow, what great questions. And of course, when shall these things be? They were there at the temple, and Jesus just got talking about how not one of these stones are going to be left atop of another. But what really got me is what shall be the signs of thy coming? Mm-hmm. And he goes off and he tells us, Chris, give us a few, Matthew 24 very well. Mm-hmm. What are some of the signs that we should be seeing concerning the coming of Jesus Christ? Maybe some highlights out of Matthew 24.
Sure. And this is, I love this. I wish we actually had, we should do another whole program just on this, because there's something that's very subtle in the language that's really easy to miss. He says, you're going to hear of. That means it's going to be what people are talking about.
Yeah.
So that's what the world's talking about. It doesn't say this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
You're going to hear about this. And then he says, but here's what's going to really be here's what you need to know. Many people, deceivers, false prophets will arise. That's what he says that's going to happen. You're going to hear what other people's opinion are. You're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. That's subterfuge. That's to give you guys the impression that something different is happening. Of course, it's all going to be.
I'd like to talk to you about another program about the false prophets that he talked about.
Yes.
What does those mean? But
Oh,
anyway, go ahead.
goodness, that's all. Yeah, it's another program after that. But his point is that that's the first of the real warnings that he gives. Here's
Yeah.
what I'm telling you to look for. Look for the false prophets, many that will come in my name saying he is the Christ, or that you can find him here or there. So deception is the first thing that Jesus really warns of. While you're hearing about this, here's what you should be paying attention to. That stuff going on in the world has been going on for time to time, but I think you'll probably find that so much of that stuff is going to be as a diversion that people are going to be talking about wars and rumors of wars, plagues and earthquakes in various places, all those things that people tend to focus on. But spiritual deception is the thing that Jesus is most concerned about in Matthew 24, though those other things will be happening concurrently, or at least the reports of them.
Yes, and where he says, and when I love what he says, and what will be the end of the world? And Jesus answered, "Take heed that no man deceives you." Like the first thing that he tells us, and the deception is about what? I think that in my mind is the deception of who Jesus is.
Sure, false Christ.
For the false Christ, because like we talked last week's program, how Jesus was coming and telling us, he says, the only way that you can come to the Father is through me. In the false, really this scenario that's out there, there's many ways to God. And I always go back to the book of Judges where we're at today. Men were doing what was right in their own eyes.
Sure.
They're making up their own philosophies, their own truths, and they're trying to live by it. But yet Jesus tries to lay it out to them. He says, either you're going to, listen to the words that I say, and you need to evaluate those words to see if they're truth or not. And that's where rubber lays on the road, basically. Chris, we got a couple more minutes. I'm babbling now. Why don't you wrap it up for us? Tell us any more thoughts about any of this end time scenarios that we have.
To me, there's so much stuff that you can, the old saying, the majoring and the minors. You can get so keyed in on, Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, this, that, or the other thing, these little peripheral things. It's good to have knowledge of them, paying attention to those things. But what I know that the devil loves to do is have us chase the shiny object. Instead, what we ought to be able to do is to say, how do we best safeguard ourselves from deception and from error? And that's to be very proficient in what the Word has to teach.